Hey everybody, this is Aubrey Chavez from Faith Matters. Today we were honored to bring on the Governor of the state of Utah, Spencer J. Cox. In recent months, Governor Cox has been in the news for the passage of two new state laws, one that puts strict limits on the access to social media for teens, and another that would prohibit social media companies from using designs that are addictive to teens. Governor Cox believes that social media and smartphones really are the culprits behind a teen mental health crisis that is manifested, for example, in a skyrocketing rate of depression among teen girls. That rate has doubled since 2010, when mass smartphone adoption began. And Governor Cox has made Utah the first state to act in such a direct way. So in this conversation, we asked Governor Cox about the rationale behind these laws, the pushback that he expects, and what he thinks the long-term legislative vision should be when it comes to teens and social media. Governor Cox argues that in any other context, if we saw the statistics that we're seeing about social media, we would drop everything to fix it. Given these drastic and unprecedented changes in mental health, it seems crucial that all people of faith should be engaging with this issue that's so important for our kids and for the connective tissue of our society. We also want to mention that Governor Cox will be appearing at our upcoming Restore gathering in October. In that presentation, he'll be talking about his new initiative as incoming chairman of the National Governors Association to help Americans disagree better. We hope that regardless of the side of the political aisle you find yourself on, that you can help us engage with these important ideas and the issues that Governor Cox is bringing to the forefront. As he might say, though we certainly won't all agree, we can all benefit from learning to do it better. Thanks so much for listening, and with that, we'll jump right into the conversation.
Governor Spencer Cox, thank you so much for joining us. It's truly an honor to have you on.
It's an honor to be with you guys. I've been looking forward to this for quite a while, so I'm glad we finally made it happen.
Oh, that's very kind. One of the things that we wanted to talk with you about is something that we know has been on your mind for at least several years, and that's the sort of recent uptick in teen mental health issues, and particularly as it pertains to social media. There are influencers like Jonathan Haidt who have been very active on this issue, and I think it's starting to be on more and more people's minds. Could you talk about maybe how you're thinking about this, why it's important to you, and some of the things that the state of Utah has done to address the issue and is planning to do going forward?
Sure. Yes. Thank you. This is such an important question. And I'm glad you mentioned Jonathan. He's somebody that I've read extensively, somebody that I've talked to about his work and his research. Jean Twenge as well, who is wonderful and has worked with him. She has a recent book that came out called Generations, and that I think is foundational to this discussion. But look, this has been an evolution for me as well. Of course, I was serving as lieutenant governor. More importantly, I'm the dad of 4 kids. I've got 3 sons and a daughter, 3 that are out of the house now in college, a couple that just got married, but then my daughter who is still at home. And as someone who worked with young people through my church work, I saw this happening over time. I have a brother who's a counselor at a high school here in Utah, and we kept having these conversations. He's like something's happening. It's just getting worse and worse. We've never seen anything quite like that. And so that's where that's the kind of the frame of reference that I come from, and seeing it with my kids a little bit, certainly with their friends. My daughter's the only one of her friends that doesn't have social media yet. She's 16 and she's mad at me all the time for that. Yeah. But we, as we were having these conversations, I wondered, is there a role for public policy in this? And at first I was very hesitant. I have a little bit of a libertarian bent when it comes to these types of things. And the government often makes things worse depending on what we're dealing with. But the more I got into the actual research behind this, and the more I looked at the at least correlation, the changes that started in 2012, almost a hockey stick type graph of depression, anxiety, and self-harm, especially with young women, kind of just exponential increases. It became very clear that something was wrong, something was broken. And this was before COVID. This, if you look at what was happening, and more and more evidence pointing directly, not just a correlation, but even some really interesting experiments that have been done that are showing causation, and not just here, but across the developed world. And that's when I just felt passionately that we needed to do something. Like, we can't just stand by and watch this happening. If this was, if these were cancer deaths, we would be losing our minds trying to figure out what was causing this. If it was, if vehicular deaths went up 300% in a few years, we would move heaven and earth to change that. And yet when it comes to social media, we all just kind of sat on our hands and so pushed really hard, brought the legislature together, legislative leadership last summer, had a meeting with them, showed them the data, the research. We held some press conferences. We brought in teachers and students. We held focus groups. We listened, we learned, and we started working on these pieces of legislation. And the real idea behind them is, one, to focus on our young people specifically. We do this with cars. We do it with alcohol, cigarettes. We have a long history of saying, hey, until your brain is more developed, some things are just a little too dangerous. But it's not just telling parents how to parent, it's giving parents the tools to do that. And so that's what we're doing. We're requiring social media companies to create kids accounts that are different than adult accounts. And the differences are, one, that parents have access to those accounts and they can decide how often they want their kids to use this. It's giving parents more tools. The default would be that they turn off at 10:30 at night, but parents can override that. If you want your kid on TikTok at 4 a.m, you can have your kid on TikTok at 4 a.m. But that's the default because kids need sleep, and we know that's one of the big problems. It turns off the algorithms, the most addictive features, and makes it so these companies can't collect data from these kids' accounts, from young people. We don't allow that in any other phase of the economy. We do not allow any other industry to collect data or enter into contractual relationships with 14-year-olds. We just don't do that. I don't know why we allow it with social media. But it's not saying kids can't have social media. We want kids to learn the best parts of social media, to still be able to connect. And that's what we're trying to do. We have a year to implement it. We're working through some of those pitfalls as we figure this out over the course of the next year.
Could you say more about why you're focusing so much on children and development? Because I think Jonathan Haidt really has done a lot of work in this exact space, and that was really illuminating for us. We have a 14-year-old daughter, and so this is something we're thinking a lot about. But it's fraught because we're on social media too. So part of this situation is that we feel like hypocrites saying, like, this is okay for me and not for you, period. So talk about why that really is the case.
Well, there's a couple reasons. One is that just kind of the politics of the possible, right? The ability to put some of these constraints around young people. The Constitution, the laws of the United States allow for that type of thing. So it's a little harder to do at the adult level, for sure. But more importantly, and I think Jonathan would say this as well. In fact, he has said this. Has a great Substack piece that just came out about phones in classrooms. But it's this idea of the developing brain and the frontal lobe, our ability to make decisions that are hard, especially when faced with addiction. And again, it's hard for adults. Adults get trapped in this addictive behavior all the time, and social media is very addictive by design. But it's even harder when that frontal lobe hasn't fully developed. And so I think that's one of the important reasons to focus on kids. Also, again, the research shows that, and Jonathan would say this as well, that puberty is a very critical time in development. And even though social media is bad in your later teen years, and honestly, it's bad for all of us. I struggle with it too, and I do feel like a hypocrite. I'm trying to do better, but there is something about that period of time when you're going through puberty. As they've looked back over those who got social media, so social media comes out, 2011, 2012, 2013. Those who were 16 at that time versus those who were going through puberty at that time, there is a big difference in outcomes with mental health. So there's something about that developmental period that is even more fraught, and that's why we're really trying to focus down on those age levels.
And based on what you're saying there, it seems like maybe you would differ from or you wouldn't necessarily agree with the recent legislation that was passed in Montana that next year implements sort of a blanket ban on TikTok, just within state lines, and it's not just government devices. Can you see something like that ever happening in Utah, or would you avoid something like that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and again, I want to, as I've traveled, I've gone to 29 high schools in the past 2 months, and I've talked to students. We've had these questions. I've asked students, thousands and thousands of students. Do you feel like social media is causing harm to your generation? And they know it is. By the way, they know this. They raise their hand, and they want to be better. And so but there are some good pieces of it as well, and I want to help them. I think that's part of childhood is figuring out and learning. Yeah, Jonathan would also tell you, I don't mean to make this a Jonathan Ice show, but his work is so important. But he will tell you that it's not just social media that's the problem. There's a second piece to this that actually precedes this, and it's unsupervised play. That we basically in the 90s, we stopped letting kids kind of roam and do their thing. I mean, when I was a kid growing up, we left in the morning, came back at night. Parents had no idea where we were. And it turns out that's really good. It's really important and really helpful. So when you take that piece away, so there's no unsupervised play now, and then you add this toxic, the toxic nature of social media, it's a recipe for disaster. Now, I promise I'm answering your question. I don't want to get rid of social media completely with young people, because I do think they need an entree there. Otherwise, you're just pushing upstream the problems.
Right.
If your first taste of social media is when you're 21, you're likely to go crazy and end up in some of the same problems, although your mind is a little more fully developed. The TikTok thing, though, is a little bit different in that there are some other issues with TikTok that I think we should be concerned about, and that has more to do with the Chinese Communist Party and what we know about access that they have to our data, and that TikTok specifically was designed as kind of a weapon of mass destruction. I've seen the briefings, some unclassified military briefings that we were able to receive about the impetus behind TikTok and how different TikTok is in China versus the American version. And it is them weaponizing the very worst of social media. And I hear it with kids all the time. I'm just going to check it. I'm not going to check it tonight. Well, let me just look at TikTok for a minute tonight. And then it's 4 a.m. and they can't stop scrolling because they really are addicted. So there may be some other reasons to treat TikTok a little differently. But as far as banning social media, I don't think that's a good idea. And I want to make sure that kids have access to the best parts.
And what do you say to critics who are saying even these bills go too far, that even these bills are going to violate the First Amendment, and this is already an overreach?
Sure. Yeah. Look, we're going to have those not just debates, but that litigation. It's going to happen, and ultimately the Supreme Court will decide what the First Amendment means when it comes to social media and young people. I feel very confident that we can that we can win those lawsuits. I really do. I've studied them. I'm an attorney. I've done a lot of constitutional law, and none of the decisions that those people use to argue involve really social media and kids in the form that we understand it now. A lot of these were decisions that were made in the late 90s when the internet was just coming of age, and so we think we have very compelling arguments to put some kind of time, place, manner restrictions on young people, and especially with the evidence of harm that we are seeing. Now, again, we have to do it in a way that is constitutionally responsible. I think we're doing that. That's why we gave us a year to work through that. We're working with social media companies to see if we can't find a better way to do that. The biggest argument is around the age verification piece. That's the hardest part. Most people although some of them don't argue that you can't put some restrictions on some young people. The argument is, well, if you're putting those restrictions on young people, you're also putting it on older people as well, because now they have to verify that their age, and they have to give over data to do that. And so that's what we're working on. How do we help make that possible? We also don't want social media companies to have copies of your personal information and your driver's.
Right. So what would it look like? What does age verification look like?
Yeah, so that's the piece we're still working through. But think about maybe a third party age verification system where you have to prove one time who you are, but they don't keep any of that. But then you get then you get a stamp of approval from them that then can be used by the social media companies. So nobody's saving that information, and there is a disconnect between the people you're verifying with and the people that you're not. We're not trying to keep adults from this. We're really not. That's not our intention. But it is difficult. I mean, I admit that there isn't a clean, easy way to do it. But that's not the question. The question is it worth destroying generations of children for that, or is the trade-off that it's going to be a little harder to do worth saving lives? And I think that's an easy trade-off. And I will just say there has been very little pushback on this. There has been some high profile pushback, and you'll hear that from some social media corners. The media, kind of desperately wants that narrative because that's important for the media. But everywhere we go, Republicans and Democrats, by the way, including the President of the United States, members of Congress, I've been talking to senators on the left and the right who are looking at what we're doing here, and then just parents, kids, students, everywhere we go, just thanking us for trying to do something. So this is that rare area where the opposition is so tiny, and we actually have bipartisan support, which is so hard to find these days on critical issues.
Yeah. There's also been a growing chorus starting to argue that cell phone or smartphones should not be allowed during the school day in schools. And we were actually just reading some really interesting research this morning that shows beyond just the sort of mental health problems that come with social media, that there was a study done that showed that the farther physical distance there was between a kid and their smartphone, the better they did on tests. So like if it's in their phone, that was the worst testing out. If it's in their pocket, that was the worst testing outcome. And if it was, locked away somewhere distant, then that was the best testing outcome. Do you think could that something like that ever get on your radar, or would that cross that sort of constitutionality line for you?
Yeah. No. Well, first of all, I sent that study to my team. We were having a very conversation this morning.
Okay.
So we're absolutely on the same page. So not only is it on our radar, it's something we've been discussing for quite a bit of time. That we actually had a bill this year that would have done that would have prevented cell phones or devices from being used in the classroom. That bill did not pass. We are working with school districts to do more of this, whether it's legislation or otherwise. I think it's absolutely important. As we talk to teachers and parents, they all understand this. But by the way, I want to tell you, so this past week, we had our very first meeting with cabinet members and senior staff where we had a no device meeting. We made them take them all out of their pockets and put them on a bench on the other side of the room. And that was before I read this study. It was just a little bit of an experiment. It won't be our last one either. We're going to be doing more of that because the study was so convincing, and I think we all kind of know this. But when that phone, even if your phone is turned off and it's in your pocket, there is this connection that happens to your brain, and that's what the study showed with kids. I mean, it was undisputable. If you could put it in another room, suddenly you're there. There's more connection, and we as human beings are wired for connection, and these devices are taking that away from us. And so, look, I know there's some concern about parents. There's some concern about school safety. What I've urged teachers to do is to have like a cubby or something just at the back of the room where kids put their devices in when they come into class. So if something happens, they could run and get their device. If they needed to, they would be close enough for that. But the increase in student learning and engagement is off the charts. I will tell you, in a couple schools, by the way, there are schools doing this already in Utah. Several schools that are doing this, and they're seeing great outcomes. It's just convincing other schools that, to step in and go that direction. But when I was in some of these high schools, on occasion, I would ask the students to put their devices away so that we could connect. And it was amazing how it changed immediately. Just the eye contact that we were having when they weren't pulling out and constantly checking their devices, and they were present in the discussion. You could just sense it in the room. It's a real thing, and we need more of it.
Yeah, it does feel like at the end of the day, there's still only so much that government can do. And so I'm curious if you feel like, are all of these efforts more about getting parents' attention and getting maybe some of these lawsuits rolling so that social media companies will actually have to implement some of these changes? Or I don't know. I imagine that you're thinking about, what can we do so that parents themselves and families actually really start trying to change what's happening in their homes. So I guess, what do you think a grassroots effort could look like, and how do you think government can actually kind of make that happen or encourage it to happen?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought this up, because you are right. We can continue to kind of push against the tide. But if everybody else is doing it and your kid isn't, it's almost impossible. It is. And this whole concept of, well, if parents were just better, it's purely the responsibility of parents. Some of the best parents I know have done everything right. And of course, kids are resourceful, and because everyone else is doing it, and belonging is one of the most powerful feelings that exist in humanity. I think belonging is at the heart of most of our societal problems today. As people are lonelier, they feel left out. We're replacing belonging with this false sense, these tribalism phones. If I don't have any friends, I can hate the same people together on Facebook, right? And this is what's happening. And so we do need kind of a shift, a societal shift to where you're the weird one if you do have full access to social media, instead of the other way around. And you're right, government can't do all of that, but what we can help and give them tools. And this is the important part. We also got funding from the legislature to launch an ad campaign. A PR campaign. And I went over 4 different pitches with the ad firm that's doing the work. We signed off on one of those pitches. And so you're going to see billboards and PSAs. You're going to see a whole bunch of ads to help parents and families understand the dangers of social media. That's where we think we can help, is to elevate this the way we've done with it. We really are using kind of the footprint of cigarettes, the opioids crisis, the things that are happening there to elevate the discussion, so parents and kids can start having these conversations, and we can help parents make better decisions.
And I'm curious, Governor, if you see this as really a sort of like a purely secular issue, or if you believe that your faith or people's faith in general can inform them as they try to address this mental health crisis that we're seeing.
I think it has to be faith involved. I really do. Again, like most of the ills of society, I go back to that belonging piece, and where we find belonging and where we find connection, and for most of the history of our country, that happened through religious connection and organizations and people coming together. Always, this is where we've tried to deal with society's greatest ills, fighting slavery through religious organizations, problems with alcoholism and cigarette smoking. They're moral issues, but they're societal issues as well. And so if we can help find that connection and lift people, we'll be far better off. And so I do worry that part of the problem is that we are losing those religious institutions, and fewer and fewer people are finding connection in those places. And not just religion, but if you look at kind of volunteer service oriented organizations, I love to use Rotary clubs as an example, Lions clubs, Elks lodges, these places like religious faith, where historically people have come together to help each other be better. and to help people who are struggling. And when we stop going to those places or doing those things, take religious philosophy or religious tenets out of it, right? And just think about the structure of those people together. Once we stop doing that, what do we replace it with? That's the question I always ask. Fine, you don't like religion, great. What are you replacing that with in your life? And if you lose that belonging and you replace it with a cell phone and social media, well, the evidence shows us that that's not the same type of connection, and it's much more damaging. And so I will just tell you, I had an interesting conversation with a member, not of my faith, in fact, a pastor, leader of a congregation here, the First Presbyterian Church, and we had a wonderful conversation. And she said, kind of growing up, we were critical of people who came to our church for just the social aspects, but they didn't have a real, a true belief in the doctrine. And she's like, I don't know if it was like that in your church. And I'm like, yep, it's like that in my church too. We all knew the people who were just there for the social aspect. They didn't have a real testimony. And we both lamented. She said, oh, how I wish that we could get people just to come for the social aspect. If that's the only reason you come, that would make our society so much better. It would make our families healthier. It would help us with these issues, again, that we're replacing, we're numbing ourselves because we have so much pain, and we can numb ourselves with alcohol, we can numb ourselves with opioids, or we can numb ourselves with social media. And a lot of us are doing that right now.
I appreciate so much that you're really making an effort to carve out an approach that is not all or nothing. That it feels like a real invitation to parents to sort of be part of this mentorship as kids are growing and their brains are developing. And instead of, like you said, kicking the can down the road and dealing with this when they're on their own and in college and discovering social media and without any boundaries, it makes sense that this is more complex and that we probably really do have to be part of the solution in our own home. But before I know we need to wrap up soon, but can you tell parents what would you love for Utah parents to be reading to help get educated about this? Because I think it really is complicated. And if you understand the nuances, maybe we'll be better equipped to sort of educate our kids, but also kind of lead them gradually into developing their own boundaries, as opposed to just cutting them off and then setting them loose.
Yeah, for sure. So we are compiling this information for parents. And as we launch the social media campaign, you'll be able to go there and see all of the best research. For now, I would encourage people to look at Jonathan Haidt's Substack, and we can put that in there. I think we agree that this is very complicated, and I want to also say that I don't think that it is just social media that is causing some of the increases in harm that we're seeing, right? In self-harm and depression, anxiety, mental illness. But I do think it is a major driver, and I think all of these things are connected. And so we can I would just encourage people to watch over the next few months. When we're ready, we'll do a press release. We'll let people know. But in the meantime, Jonathan's Substack really is probably the best place to find that. And Jonathan pronounced height, but it looks like hate. So that's a great place to start and a great place to look at. And I appreciate resources like this podcast that are helping to get that information out there, because as parents, we do feel like we're kind of alone sometimes, that we're out there on an island. The last thing I just wanted to say on this piece is kids aren't just the problem. Adults are the problem too. And we are addicted, and we are using social media in very divisive ways. And I actually think that that this messaging with our young people will help us be better as adults. And I encourage our young people all the time. I think they do understand it. I think they're better than we are in so many ways, and that they can help us as parents to put our phones aside and spend a little more quality time together.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Governor Cox.
Thank you so much, Governor. Thank you for your leadership on this issue. You have really been out front. Thank you for your thoughtfulness on the issue. And we're excited to see you in October at our Restore gathering. Can't wait to see you in person there.
I'm so looking forward to it. We were going to try to do it last year, and it didn't work out with my schedule, but I can't wait. Thank you for the great work that you all are doing, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. All right, thanks so much for listening, and a big thanks to Governor Cox for coming on the podcast. If Faith Matters content is resonating with you and you get the chance, we would love for you to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you listen on. We read all of the reviews, and it really helps us to get the word out about Faith Matters, and we appreciate the support. Thanks again for listening, and remember, you can check out more at faithmatters.org.